So we're sort of on the theme of coastal scenes and boats. So I actually had somebody in the morning class request something to do with painting trees. So I was thinking, well, I'll do some coastal trees then. So that's why that's why I did get cut trees at the coast. So that could be part of the coastal scene. So this was Wales. I'm not going to bother painting beach huts, but more kind of trees and skies. And I'll make it watercolours, which, as you know, I find very, very challenging as a medium. So, yeah, what I suggest is perhaps you painting the sky first and use big brushes and get plenty of paint mixed. So you've got a nice big wash. So I shall quick kind of Scotch. So I'm using a little bit of cerulean blue and a little bit of ultramarine blue mixed together. Let's mix a bit more paint actually. And then this is a nice big natural hairbrush. The natural hairbrushes will hold a lot more moisture, so they're much easier to use for things like skies. Ideally have your paper a little bit of an angle, perhaps a little bit like that. This is a little bit too steep. So I'm leaving a couple of gaps there. That wasn't intentional, but it could be clouds. So that can be the sky bit. And then if you wanted to lift areas out, you could wash the brush and dry it a little bit. Just squeeze the moisture out, and then while it's still wet, you might be able to lift a little bit more out where you want to suggest clouds or something. So that could vary the sky a little bit. The beach area, I'm going to use start with a little bit of yellow, raw sienna, which is like quite an earthy colour. So it's good to have a bit of paper just to try colours out. So that to me is far too yellow. If we sort of compare that to that, and although that's quite an earthy yellow, it's a little bit too much yellow with it. So I'll add a little bit of red to that, and maybe even a little bit of blue. Just tone that down a bit. So that will come out a bit more like that. And that to me is a lot closer to the colours that I'm seeing in my photograph. If you've got scraps of paper, or just bits, if you pop a little bit right on the edge of the paper, and then you can then compare a lot closer. So rather than have paint right in the middle, just try a little bit on the edge, or if you've got the scraps, and that way you can see it. You know, you've got a more direct comparison. So I think that'll work for that. I'll just mop those bits of blue up, and then go back in with this. So I'm not going to paint any further down than that. That would be fine. Some areas are a little bit darker. So if I went in with a slightly stronger mix, so something with not so much water in it, so just the raw sienna and similar sort of mix, but not too much water. And then I can then pop a little bit of that in, and that will mingle in with what's there. So I'm just thinking these darker, shadowy areas at the front. So that would be the first stage. I'll let that dry. So I want that to sort of dry completely now, so that I get nice, sort of soft, big washes. And then I can then have a go at popping the trees in. So this was one I did a minute ago. Not quite such a strong colour on the beach, but that's one that I've sort of pre-prepared, so that I can go on to the next stage. So painting the trees themselves, you've got a choice of having quite sharply defined trees, or I could re-dampen some of this and get some sort of softer edges, what they call wet and wet washes. So I'll do a little bit of that first. So just just want to kind of dampen that without lifting the paint that's there already. And then I'll go in with a slightly smaller brush. I'll use this brush. Now these are a little bit far away, so I don't want them too bright a green. So this sort of slightly greyer green would be good. So a little bit of blue in the mix. And because I'm working into a wet area, I should get slightly softer edges. It's not that way actually, so let's try again. Get another area, that bit there. And then a bit more of that. Yeah, so it's something a little bit like that, so you get a softer look. I quite like watercolours where you've got some soft areas, some sharp areas. I brought a couple of books in here, so a couple of artists that I quite like some of their work. So I think it's quite good to look at actual watercolour paintings or illustrations of paintings, rather than just look at photographs. So when it comes to watercolour, it's quite a good idea looking at other watercolour artists, seeing how they interpret the subject. So that'd be quite a soft look, and then sharper. Now you could, if you wanted, you could sketch. Once this is dry, you could sketch in some shapes. I'll just go more directly, I think. I'm just using a slightly smaller, longer brush now, and perhaps something like this one here. Again, I can't see an awful lot of green in that one. It's more of a kind of greyed down colour. So let's go a little bit drier actually. Just kind of following soften that out a little bit. Yeah, I'm going to go in a little bit lighter to start with, and then put some slightly darker bits in because that's a bit too strong as it was. So if I've got sketching a main stem, and it's worth actually experimenting with different brushes and exploring the different marks that they're made. Yeah, that's looking a bit more like that. So kind of still a reasonable sized brush. And slightly thicker paint, slightly stronger paint. So I've got this kind of browny colour in, actually now just putting a slightly darker colour in with it. Back to that. Also perhaps try a rougher brush. So this is quite a bristly brush, and this will give me a lot more of a sort of scratchy look, so that's another one you could try. Gives a slightly more textured look, that one, that works quite nicely. And then I'll go in with some slightly darker tones, and while it's still wet, so that I get lighter areas and darker areas. I think they look more interesting when you haven't got just one solid tone, one solid colour. So sort of using that as my inspiration, something like that. So I would suggest lots of quick kind of studies. This is a few bits I tried last week. I felt like I was getting closer to what I wanted as it went on. So not necessarily taking on a whole scene, maybe just do a few studies of different bits of it first, and then you may then want to put something together. That's towards the end of the session. Any questions? Okay, right.